You are listening to African Voices in the Energy Space, a podcast by AHADI Collab. Each episode contains 3 20-minute parts which you can listen to at your leisure. Over the next few weeks, join me, Lerato, Ngakane, as we engage in the multiverse of South Africa's energy sector through the multiple lenses of our AHADI Collab members as they tackle hard topics to address the energy challenges we face as a country. Welcome to African Voices in the Energy Space. Today's 3-part episode is about energy poverty, a stark look at who has access to energy in this country. Access to clean, adequate, affordable, and reliable forms of modern energy is vital for human well-being and development. The International Energy Agency asserts that access to modern energy is directly influenced by income levels. The lack of or limited access to modern energy results in the use of fuels such as wood, coal, candles, paraffin, all of which pose severe health and safety risks. The United Nations Development Programme defines energy poverty as a lack of access to clean, safe, and affordable energy. In South Africa, the expenditure-based measure is typically used whereby households spending more than 10% of their income on energy are deemed energy poor. Using this measure, 47% of households in South Africa are considered energy poor. On average, South Africans spend 14% of their income on energy. However, in the poorest income quintile, this figure is 27%. On this week's episode, Siwe Kuse is in conversation with Bathandwa Vazi as they unpack the realities of energy poverty and who has energy in this country. So energy poverty is a complex and multifaceted issue and is driven by a diverse range of social and economic factors such as rising electricity prices, which we all know about, household incomes, energy inefficient homes, just to name a few. To do justice to developing energy poverty solutions, these factors need to be really understood. So here's a little bit about our guests and who they are, what they do. Here's a little bit about our guests and our host, who they are and what they do and what they're about. So Siwe is completing her master's degree at UCT looking at political economy of reform and energy regime transitions. So Bathandwa's focus has been on the implementation of renewable energy and energy efficiency over the last 5 years, working on urban development, green energy, electricity, roads and public transport, waste management, and water and sanitation. It's a mouthful, ladies. I hope this is a good conversation.
Hi Bathandwa, how are you?
I'm good, Siwe, and I'm quite happy to be here.
I'm very honored to have you here today. We're going to be chatting about energy access as a goal of national and local governments in South Africa. I know this is an area that you've worked on quite a lot. Just your take on how important it is to deal with that issue of energy poverty, because I feel like despite South Africa's high overall electrification rate, there are still challenges related to affordability and reliability.
And access.
That kind of hinder the country's developmental agenda. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, most definitely. I do think that, there's a lot that's happening in the energy space in the country. And I do think that, it's taken a lot of years for us to get to where we are right now, whereby, societies can actually really think of the idea of owning their own generation as something that is possible, as a response to years and years of not being able to access the kind of clean, efficient energy that everybody else has. And obviously we are talking about a demographic that is, lower than your middle class in most instances. So yeah, I think a lot is happening. It's an exciting space right now. And obviously it goes back to what you were saying just now, to sort of look at the gaps.
Yes, those gaps, because there's access and we have near universal energy access in the country, but we have energy poverty, which exists here, where households do not have adequate energy. It's not affordable, it's not reliable, the quality is not good, it's not safe, and it's not environmentally sound. So if you don't have those energy services in place, they can't support the country's developmental agenda. And it goes back to my point of, which I want to highlight in today's conversation, is that energy poverty coincides with other forms of poverty in South Africa.
Exactly.
We have the biggest Gini coefficient, the highest in the world. And that doesn't exist by accident. So when we talk about energy poverty, we need to center other forms of historical inequality, inequities that exist in our society. And one of the metrics we use to measure energy poverty is where a household spends more than 10% of their income on energy services. That's not normal.
Yeah.
That's not normal.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It isn't normal. You know, I was just saying another day when we were having a similar conversation, I was saying you have to look at it from the income perspective to say, if you are earning, for example, 20,000 rand, you still don't spend 10% of your income.
No ways. Yeah.
So now think about somebody who's earning 1,000 rand a month, 10% or even more than that, because it becomes more, for those households, they do get free basic energy from the municipality. Obviously, there's a systematic process that they have to follow. They have to register as indigent and all of that and all of that. But it's also not enough because the municipality is capping that to, in most instances, it's usually 50 kilowatts for the month. And obviously 50 kilowatts is
that's not adequate for it.
It's not for everything. It's not. So because it's not adequate for everything, you find that people living in low income households will have to supplement that. So that's where now the expense, that's where the affordability comes in, because they have to supplement. So for them, it's always a choice of, we're going to use this for lighting and entertainment and the appliances, that have to be connected on electricity every day and for the whole month.
Yes.
And then for heating and cooking, we'll use alternative. So alternative for such households is usually paraffin. Gas for some, because gas is also kind of expensive.
It is. And then biofuels, which are hazardous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where the poverty part of it comes in. That for middle and high income, especially for high income, alternative energy is solar. But for low income, alternative is non-sustainable. It's paraffin, it's coal, it's your biofuels.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that energy prices are increasing at a systemic rate in South Africa at the moment. And this places a significant pressure on low-income households because their budgets directly and indirectly, are affected, whether it's through food prices even, for example.
Yeah.
And what I also want to just chat about quickly is that energy poverty is also gendered. It disproportionately affects women-headed households. It affects many households at both the rural and the urban scale, obviously with higher rates at the rural areas. I just want you to touch on that as well.
Yeah, so the reason why every aspect of, when you're talking about poverty, what you said earlier, that with energy poverty, it's in line with all other forms of poverty that exist. So your income, your economic, and whatever.
You can't look at it in a vacuum.
You can look at it in a vacuum.
It's you've got the colonialism, and then you've got apartheid, and you've got the remnants of that, and they disproportionately affect a certain demographic.
Yeah.
So
with gender, we do know that predominantly our households are led by women, right? So as much as you will have a household that has both partners, your female and male, but most of the decisions that have to do with running the household falls on the woman. And then you have an incredibly high number of households in South Africa that are women-led, right? I also have my own household, and I'm single, and I have a child, so I'm responsible for all the decisions that have to do with running my household. So that is the trend in South Africa.
Absolutely.
So for your rural households, for your people living in informal settlements, people who live in social housing, that's the trend.
Absolutely.
So because of that, because the scales are not equal, you have a high number of women-led households, and therefore everything falls upon them. And another thing is that women earn less.
Yes, this is true.
And women are not they don't participate in the economy as men do.
Yes.
Right?
You look at our own industry. We're in the energy sector, and it's the least, most gender kind of
Equal.
non-diverse, there's no gender parity in the energy sector. It's ridiculous. I mean, the International Energy Agency publishes a study every single year, but the stats don't change. So I'm so glad we actually touched on it. And I want us to, have now a conversation where we talk about the mechanisms in place to address these issues, where these mechanisms fail or succeed, and what we can do about it moving forward. So the kind of first two questions I want to direct to you are, what are the key factors that influence and produce energy poverty in South Africa, and how does energy poverty actually manifest in our society? Those are the two kind of top two questions I want to pose to you before we get going with the rest.
Okay, so that first question was what are the two?
What are the key factors that influence energy poverty in South Africa?
Okay, so from my understanding is firstly not having access to the economy or not being economically active. So not necessarily unemployment, but just not having opportunities to generate income.
Yes.
So that's one point, and the other point is having low income. So you are having some form of income, but it's lower than the rest.
And then my second part was, how does it then manifest?
Into energy poverty.
How does it manifest into energy poverty? How do we now say, right, energy poverty here in this particular household?
Yeah, so...
Or in this community?
You did say in the beginning that a lot of, South Africa has sort of reached universal access. Right?
Almost, yes.
Yes. But in that universal access being reached, the number of households that actually cannot afford. So with energy poverty, you're looking at access and you're looking at affordability.
Yes,
right?
And I love that you point out that it's in South Africa, we've got that universal access thing. And I just want to quickly, for whoever's listening, to kind of highlight that the rest of the continent, you see in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa accounts for half of that generation capacity. Also, the carbon emissions, just FYI. But when we talk about electrification, in other parts where we talk about there's energy poverty, it's usually a situation where they don't even have access to it. But in South Africa, the power lines are in your house, but you don't have access to it.
Yeah.
So that juxtaposition is striking, and this is why I want to kind of talk to you about your perspective of how it manifests in our society.
Yeah.
Versus in Malawi, for example, they have a 10% electrification rate, but South Africa has over 85%, nearly 90. If I'm just not sure of the correct stat.
Yeah, it's about 80 to 90. Yeah.
So it's like, that juxtaposition, how does it manifest in South Africa, and what makes it unique in our particular context?
Like you're saying, I'm just, whilst you were talking, I'm just thinking about a rural setting where there are these power lines that are going around, and they there are still those communities, your Northern KZN, especially in some parts of Eastern Cape, and I think Limpopo, because obviously those are where the homelands were.
Yes.
So those are the three main
stands.
Yes, those are the ones that actually have the highest levels of poverty in the country. So that's the one part where the infrastructure is there, but the actual household access or household cabling isn't there.
All right.
But however, when we talk about universal access, now we are actually saying that the cabling has now been there, and people can switch on the light, and they actually can, they have electricity.
Yeah.
But they don't have enough to actually do the things that they need to do. So, for example, electricity access goes beyond the household.
Yes.
When you have access to electricity, you can actually participate. You are able to be independent in the sense that you can kind of generate your own income. So it goes back
actively in the economy.
Yeah. So it goes back to that whole affordability and having. Yeah, and actually having income to sustain yourself.
Yes.
So the income part of it, and how sort of responding to what you're saying, is that it's not just, when we're getting income, it's not just to support our energy needs or our electricity needs. It's for us to be whole individuals who are active in society, who are able to get the things that they need to survive, to improve their livelihoods, to send their kids to school, to do all of those things.
Such an important point, Bathandwa, because I think, especially even in our industry, in the energy sector, people kind of look at energy as like a technocratic issue where it's just about creating and generating the energy. People don't look at it from a humanistic, human-centered...
the social aspect of it.
And it should be centered like that. Because a person is not concerned about electricity, they're concerned about energy.
Yeah, they're concerned about what it can do for them.
What it can do for me. Yeah. I'm concerned about the light switching on and me being able to afford it.
Yeah.
So it goes beyond things about tariff setting.
Yeah.
It goes even how the electricity is generated, because is it now affordable? So you can't just think about electricity from like an investment standpoint about, okay, for example, solar is cheaper than coal. You also have to kind of center the conversation from a human perspective, which is such a lacking conversation in our industry. And I now want to kind of move on to something you mentioned. You mentioned that you mentioned KZN, you mentioned the Eastern Cape, and you mentioned Limpopo, about those were the old homelands, the Bantustans under apartheid. And the interesting thing is that those regions right now, because of the colonial and apartheid planning, those remnants are manifesting today. There's a legacy of poverty that's been sustained. There's a legacy of separation. There's a level of othering that manifests even in energy, which is why I want to get to a conversation about spatial geography and planning. Does it play a heavy role in energy poverty and the experiences that people have?
It plays a major role, Siwe. It plays a major role. So from the energy discussion, right? There's a transport discussion. There's the housing discussion, right? And I won't talk about water because water is something else. But within the energy space, somebody has to have access to housing, and then somebody has to have access to efficient transportation.
Yes.
Now, the legacy of apartheid planning has placed people outside the resources. So think about Eastern Cape, for example. The closest place that has all the amenities that people would need is Mthatha.
If you're in the Transkei.
Yeah. So now there are all those small towns. Say, for example, Flagstaff, Leeuwmanfre, how far are they from
Mthatha? Yes, you have to get in a taxi that's going to cost you a lot.
Exactly.
Probably 10% of your income.
Exactly. So it also responds to the other things that impact energy poverty, because a person has to now make a decision on transportation costs. And a lot of houses will actually opt to continue using paraffin lights, to continue using candles to light, to continue using gas and all of that, because they won't have money to actually purchase electricity.
And you spoke about the rural setting, which is interesting, but I also want to touch on the urban setting.
Urban setting as well, which is exactly the same thing. So what's happening also in the urban setting is that land that is available to build, and land where people can actually be able to have housing is still outside. All the spaces that are closer to the urban center, and all the spaces that are closer to the economic activity are outside. So think about our informal settlement.
And that's the history.
Yes, that's the history.
That's the history of if it's a coal mine worker having to travel having to leave their home in the Eastern Cape and work in a particular region where you're working for that, or if you are a domestic worker living a Kukuletu but you're having to service a house in Constantia. Look at that separation, that spatial planning that exists in 2021, literally hindering people from being able to participate meaningfully in an economy where they can actually grow themselves, because a bunch of their income has to go towards that.
To transport, yes. I think the interesting thing that's developing in the COJ, I was just listening to the news the other day. Apparently now they are sort of looking at buildings that have been owned, or that are owned by government parastatals that they're going to convert. So I guess it's buildings that used to house workers, and obviously over time time those buildings got invaded and whatever the case. So now they're going to convert those into social housing, which was a very interesting thing that other cities can actually start looking at. Because if you have social housing in the city, you are saving that person a lot of money. I mean, even for a person who's middle income or high income, staying outside the city costs a lot. You know, the petrol costs. So now comparing that to someone who has to take 5 taxis a day, how much is that?
You see, energy poverty cannot be divorced from other
forms of
poverty.
Yeah.
Each episode contains 3 20-minute parts which you can listen to at your leisure.